What's up, YouTube? I'm here doing my prediction video for UFC Fight Night Lee versus Iaquinta. Let's start at the bottom. The first fight is Chris De La Rocha versus Juan Adams, and this is essentially just two big heavyweights who are both strikers going at it. I'm leaning towards Juan. I just think he's the better striker overall. There's not too much to say about this fight. I mean, these guys are both just average, and this is a good fight for both of them, but Chris De La Rocha's just been knocked out a couple times, and Juan's undefeated, so I'm leaning towards him. I say Juan wins by first round knockout. Next is Trevor Smith versus Zach Cummings, and these guys are the same. They're both like striker wrestlers with like good submission chokes. Zach Cummings is moving back up to middleweight from welterweight. It's probably too hard to make that weight cut for him. Trevor Smith's probably just a slight bit bigger, but I think that he's older and just not as good of a striker overall. And I think that because of that, the fight's just going to lean towards Zach. I think that, like I said, I think his striking's better, and I think he's just younger, so he can just work longer. And Trevor Smith's been knocked out a few times, and I think that's going to help Zach too. So I say Zach wins by either decision or like knockout in the first round. So, like I said, lean towards Zach. Next, we got Adam Milstead versus Mike Rodriguez, and this is another fight where it's two guys who are both primarily strikers, but I do feel like Adam's just shown much more. Even though his record is 1-2 in the UFC, I felt like one of his losses was against Curtis Blades, who's just way bigger than him, and then the other one was against another great wrestler that I thought he won that fight. I thought his takedown defense looked much better in that fight than he did in the Curtis fight. But yeah, he looks like a good striker with good takedown defense and decent wrestling of his own. And Mike Rodriguez, to me, just looks like he's primarily a striker, and I think that if Adam needed to, he probably could get it to the ground, so I'm leaning towards Adam to say he wins either by knockout or TKO or by decision. Now we got Jessica Rose Clark versus Adriana Lee, and this is like striker jiu-jitsu. Both of these chicks are striker jiu-jitsu chicks. No, it's a little stuffy, sorry about that. But yeah, I'm leaning towards Adriana Lee. I just think she's a little bit better everywhere. I think this will be a fun fight back and forth, but I think she uses her kicks really well, and that'll help mix up her game, and I think she's a little bit stronger, and that'll help her with the grappling, so I'm leaning towards Adriana Lee. I say she wins by decision. Next, we got Dan Ige versus Jordan Griffin, and this kind of depends where the fight goes. I think on the ground, Dan's a little bit better, and I think on the feet, Jordan's a little bit better. Like I said, I think it depends on who can keep it where. I think it's really close. Both of these guys are like striker jiu-jitsu guys for the most part, but it's tough because I feel like Dan's younger, but Jordan's got the experience, and he's not super old, so this is a real coin flip fight. I'm just leaning towards Dan. I think his wrestling's a little bit better than Jordan's is, and I think that'll help him. But yeah, like I said, this is really close. But yeah, I'm leaning towards Dan. Next, we got Gerald Muskrat versus Jack Hermanson, and to me, this depends on kind of who's got the better cardio, because I think they're pretty close in a lot of areas. I think that overall jiu-jitsu, Gerald's better. I think striking, they're about even, but I think Jack's got the much better wrestling. I think this is kind of who can put the pace on the other guy. And I'm leaning towards Gerald. I just like his more well-roundedness. I think that his submission game is much better than Jack's is. I think he just has way more ways of attacking. This is another really close one. A lot of the fights on this card are close. I think it depends a lot on, like I said, who can keep their cardio and who can keep the pace. But I'm leaning towards Gerald. I just think he hits a bit harder, and I prefer his submission style. So I'm leaning towards Gerald. I think he wins by submission in like the second round. Next, we got Jared Gordon versus Joaquin Silva, and I just feel like this fight, Joaquin Silva should be a pretty big favorite. I don't know if he is, but Jared Gordon, to me, he's been knocked out twice, and I think Joaquin is a really great striker with really strong jiu-jitsu. I don't think Jared's going to be able to take him down or hold him down, and I think striking-wise, I give a pretty solid advantage to Joaquin. I think Jared, is a high-volume guy, but so is Joaquin. It's not like he can't throw pretty decent volume, and I think he just hits way harder. And I think, like I said, I think striking and jiu-jitsu-wise, Joaquin is better. I think that his takedown defense is really solid too. And like I said, I don't know who the favorite is, but I'm strongly leaning towards Joaquin. I think that he's going to win by knockout, probably in the first or second round. Next, we got Bobby Green versus Drakkar Klose. And this is all about distance, like who can keep the distance. Because I think striking-wise, these guys are pretty close. And I think overall wrestling and grappling-wise, these guys are pretty close. Drakkar is going to do what he wants to do, kind of. I think he wants to kind of dance around Bobby Green for 3 rounds. I think Bobby Green wants to kind of clip him as he's coming in and out. And it's all about who's striking just a slight bit better and who just controls that distance. I'm leaning towards Bobby Green just because I think he hits a lot harder, but I could easily see Jakar just dancing around him for 3 rounds. Like I said, a lot of fights on this card are super close. This is probably one of the toughest cards of the year. I think a lot of these fights have really even matchups. But I'm leaning towards Bobby Green. I think that, like I said, I think he just hits a little bit harder. And I think the way he throws punches, he's good at catching guys as they come in and out, which is kind of what Jakar wants to do. But like I said, Jakar I do think is faster and overall more athletic, so I could see him dancing around Bobby Green for 3 rounds, but I just think Bobby Green's going to catch him sooner or later and win by knockout. Next we got Zach Ottawa versus Dwight Grant, and it's hard to tell how good Dwight Grant is just because he's had that one fight in Dana White looking for a fight, and he looked decent in it, but he's still pretty old and he hasn't fought super regularly. Zach Ottawa, on the other hand, he's got good striking, good wrestling, good jiu-jitsu, but he has been caught quite a bit by good strikers and knocked out quite a few times. I think this is the fight where we're going to see how good Dwight Grant really is. I mean, if he can keep Zach Ottawa off him, I do think he's going to knock out Zach sooner or later. And that's just what I see happening. I think Dwight looked really good, and like I said, we're going to see how good he really is. If he can't stop those takedowns, then he'll be out of the UFC real quick. But if he can stop Zach from taking him down, I do think Dwight's the much better striker, and I think he'll catch him sooner or later. So I'm leaning towards Dwight. I think he wins by either first or second round knockout. On to the main card. The first fight is Jim Miller versus Charles Oliveira. And Jim Miller fights nowadays are so hard to call because he has that Lyme disease, and that kind of fucks him up some of his fights where he has like no cardio sometimes. And then there's fights where it's like cleared up and he looks like he could easily be a top 15 guy. So it's just so hard to pick with Jim Miller because, like I said, you never know how healthy he's going to be going into these fights because that Lyme disease never goes away. It just gets better or it gets worse. Like that's what he looks like in every fight. Like when it's not that bad, he looks amazing. He looks like he's still a top 15 guy, like I said. But when it's bad, he just looks mediocre. And like I said, I would never bet on Jim Miller. I don't know how many of you guys bet, but yeah, I feel like he is better than Charles. I think his striking's gotten a lot better. And Charles, I think, on the ground, he's more active, but I think Jim Miller's the overall better grappler. I think Charles takes a lot of risks, and Jim Miller will be able to capitalize on them and get on top with that. Like I said, it all depends on how well Jim Miller's feeling going into this fight, but I think if he is feeling well, I'm picking him. I think his striking is really good. I don't know if Charles will be able to force this to the ground. And I just really like the way Jim kicks the legs. I think Charles doesn't take damage very well because of his frame. And I just think Jim Miller wins by TKO from leg kicks in the first round. I think he keeps on the feet and just finishes him with that. Next, we got Rob Font versus Sergio Pettis. And this depends entirely on how Sergio looks at bantamweight. I mean, he looks decent at flyweight. He's definitely gotten a lot better since he came into the UFC. I've said this before. My biggest problem with Sergio is he has no finishing ability. And I think that fucks him over in a lot of his fights. That and his takedown defense are just okay. I mean, he's definitely gotten better as takedown defense, but the finishing ability is still a problem. Like I said, Rob Font's definitely going to be the bigger, longer guy, but I think Sergio is the better striker technically overall. This just depends on, kind of how he's able to stuff the takedowns and how well he can kind of avoid the strikes. It's really tough just because I haven't seen him fight at bantamweight in a long time, and he's fighting a guy who's really good, but I am leaning towards Sergio. I think he keeps him on the feet for 3 rounds, and I think he just kind of outpoints Rob for 3 rounds. But once again, this is another super close fight where I think Rob could easily overwhelm him with his better power. But I'm leaning towards Sergio. I think he can avoid the big power and keep it on the feet, and I think he wins a 30-27 decision. Next, we got Edson Barboza versus Dan Hooker, and to me, Dan Hooker has definitely looked a lot better in every single fight, but I just think Barboza's the much faster, much cleaner striker. I don't think Dan's good enough to get this to the ground. His wrestling's not good enough. It's not like Barboza's last 2 fights where he essentially fought 2 of the top 3 wrestlers in the lightweight division. And I think he keeps this on the feet, and Dan Hooker will try to keep it on the feet as well. I think he likes to strike, but I think this is going to be like when Barboza fought Paul Felder. I think it'll be fun back and forth striking fight, but with Barboza just edging out every round with his better striking. And that's what I see happening. I mean, it could be fight of the night, but I just think Barboza edges every round and wins 30-27. Finally, we got Kevin Lee versus Iaquinta, and to me, Kevin Lee's just gotten much better over the years. I think his striking and wrestling, the way he mixes it, is a lot better. I think when he first fought Iaquinta, he was just a wrestler, and Iaquinta could stuff the takedowns really easily because his boxing was just so much better than Kevin's is. At this point, I don't think there's that huge of a gap. I mean, Iaquinta's still the much better striker. I don't think that's even close, but On the ground, I think Kevin Lee's shown he's much better than Al is at this point. I think that if Kevin can get this to the ground, he'll fuck him up, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think it'll be close at first, but I think eventually Kevin will get this to the ground. And I've said this before, I think Kevin Lee, even though I think he's just okay overall, I think he has one of the best mounts in all of MMA. Like, when he mounts dudes, he fucks them up. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think eventually he gets this to the ground, and when he does, I think he's going to get mount and just fuck up Al Iaquinta. I think it's going to be in the first or second round, and this is what I see happening. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe.